Good evening. Tonight we will drift into a story set in the stillness of ages past, when empires rose from the vast steppes and a single man carried the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. We shall follow him not in the fury of conquest, but in the quiet hours that followed, when rest and memory settled upon the earth like the hush after a storm. The lands of the steppe stretched far and unbroken, as though the horizon itself had no end. From the rolling grasses of Mongolia to the valleys where rivers wound with silver brightness, the land was immense, its silence interrupted only by the low whistle of the wind. The ground carried the scent of dry earth and faint traces of smoke from distant encampments. When the sun rose, it revealed a plain that seemed infinite, a quilt of tawny grasses, rough-hewn soil, and wandering herds moving with the rhythm of the seasons. Upon this boundless expanse, the empire of the great Khan had unfurled. Yet the story here was not of battles or burning cities, but of what lay in their aftermath. For in the stillness of victory, there was a different kind of power, the ability to pause, to gather, to remember, and to rest. The camps of the Khan were unlike the fragile tents of small clans. They were great encampments, filled with gurs, round dwellings of felt and wood, their walls thick against the winds of the steppe. Smoke coiled slowly from the round holes at their tops, marking the hearth fires that burned within. From a distance, the settlement resembled a cluster of pale domes scattered across the grasslands, standing against the emptiness like stars fallen upon the earth. Inside these gurs, the air carried warmth. Felt carpets softened the ground, and the walls were hung with patterned cloths, dyed in reds, blacks, and ochres. The furnishings were spare but carefully placed. Low wooden chests bound with iron, bronze vessels for drinking, leather saddles resting near the entrance. At the center of each gur, a fire flickered, its smoke escaping through the round aperture above, its light dancing upon the curved beams. In the grand gur of the Khan himself, the sense of space was deliberate. The hearth was larger, fed by cut logs rather than mere brush, and above it the roof pole rose higher than that of any other dwelling. Furs lay upon the floor, not only to soften the ground, but to speak of the lands over which he ruled. Tiger skins from the forests to the east, the hides of snow leopards from the mountains, sable and ermine that shimmered softly in the firelight. Every surface carried the trace of distance, of conquest turned into possession, of far-flung provinces brought into the circle of his dwelling. The air in this space was thick with aromas: roasted mutton, steaming milk, the sharp tang of fermented mare's drink, and the faint sweetness of herbs gathered from riverbanks. Outside, the air remained cold, scented with grass and dust, but within, warmth surrounded every movement. The Khan himself was a figure not only of power, but of presence. When he rested, it was not with the fragility of ordinary men, but with the gravity of one who had carried countless burdens. His shoulders were broad, his back strong, though the years of campaign had etched their weight into his frame. His hair, once black, bore the first threads of silver, yet his eyes still carried the sharpness of falcons, capable of surveying the farthest horizon. His hands bore the marks of reins, of bowstrings, of sword hilts. Yet in the quiet hours, those same hands rested upon bowls of warm broth, or upon the furs where he reclined. Around him, the retinue moved with careful rhythm. Warriors who had ridden with him since the earliest years now walked with measured steps, their armor set aside, their faces softened by firelight. Their garments of wool and leather carried the smell of horse and smoke. Yet in these moments of rest, they bore more the weight of companionship than of battle. Some sat upon low stools, speaking in murmurs, while others tended the fires or poured drink. Beyond the circle of warriors, women moved with equal presence. Some were wives of noble birth, their garments heavy with embroidered detail. Others were attendants, their hands skilled in the pouring of drink, the preparation of food, the arranging of furs. Their hair was braided and dark, gleaming in the light of the flames. They did not speak loudly, for the tone of the place was one of stillness, but their presence filled the ger with life. At times, the Khan sat in silence, listening not to voices, but to the wind outside, a sound that never ceased. It pressed against the felt walls of the dwelling, sighing through the grass, reminding him that the steppe was greater than any one man, even the greatest of Khans. When such moments, the flickering fire seemed like a fragile island of warmth within a sea of emptiness. When feasting followed conquest, it was not a riotous clamor, but a measured gathering. Great bronze cauldrons were brought forth, filled with meats that had simmered for hours, their broth rich with marrow. Bowls of kumis, mare's milk fermented until sharp and lively, were passed from hand to hand. The warriors ate with steady appetite, tearing meat from bone, drinking in long draughts, their faces flushed with warmth. Yet beneath the laughter and low songs, there remained the undertone of fatigue, the release that came only when long campaigns had ended. The Khan did not laugh loudly. His manner was one of contemplation. He drank, he ate, he listened, but always with the composure of one who carried both past and future in his silence. His gaze would sometimes drift beyond the walls, as though even while resting, his mind remained upon the distances yet to be crossed. In the mornings after such feasts, the camp stirred slowly. Horses whickered as they were watered, smoke rose anew from hearths, and the cold air sharpened breath into visible mist. The Khan would emerge from his ger with deliberate steps, wrapped in heavy robes of wool and fur. The steppe air, cold and unyielding, met him as an equal. His eyes would survey the horizon, not searching for enemies, but as though measuring the peace itself, testing whether it held firm. Among his warriors, there was reverence in these quiet days. They knew him not only as conqueror, but as one who granted rest. After campaigns that stretched for seasons, the allowance of stillness was a gift. Horses grazed freely, men sharpened weapons with no urgency, women tended fires without haste. The camp became not a place of movement, but of grieving, of gathering strength once more. Yet rest was never only for the body. The Khan also rested in the company of lineage. His sons, born of many wives, moved through the camp, some already grown into men, others still in youth. They bore his likeness in varying degrees, the strong brows, the steady gaze, the stance of riders bred to the saddle. With them he spoke sparingly, not in the manner of casual conversation, but with the tone of one imparting lessons even in stillness. The daughters, too, were present, their garments lighter, their faces framed by braids adorned with silver rings. They moved with a grace that was both familial and political, for their futures were bound to alliances, their marriages woven into the fabric of empire. The Khan regarded them with measured eyes, acknowledging their role not as ornaments, but as threads in the wide tapestry of power. In the evenings, after the fires had been fed and the air within the ger thickened with warmth, the Khan sometimes reclined among women whose beauty was chosen to soothe and to sustain. Their laughter was low, their touch light, their words soft as the felt walls. They sang in voices that carried the tone of rivers, of grasslands stirred by wind, of distant homelands now bound beneath his reign. It was here, in these hours, that he sought not conquest, but continuity, leaving behind sons who would carry his name into lands yet unseen. Yet even in such moments there was no haste. Time in the Khan's presence flowed slowly, as though the steppe itself had entered the ger. Every movement, every gesture, carried weight, for nothing was rushed. It was rest, not indulgence. It was continuity, not mere pleasure. The seasons marked these intervals of repose. In summer, the grass grew tall, filling the air with a sweetness that mingled with the scent of horse and earth. The encampment stretched across rolling hills, the gurs gleaming white beneath the sky. Herds moved near rivers, their reflections broken by ripples of water. In winter, the winds swept harsh and cutting, and the camp huddled more tightly, fires burning stronger, garments layered thickly against the cold. In every season, rest carried its own form, more open in warmth, more guarded in frost, yet always present as a pause between the tides of conquest. At night, the stars gathered in unnumbered hosts. The sky above the steppe was not veiled by smoke or city lamps, but spread wide and clear, its constellations etched in bright silence. The Khan, lying upon furs within his dwelling, often looked upward through the round opening of the roof, watching as the fire's glow softened the edge of the heavens. For a man who had crossed so many lands, the stars were the only horizon that never shifted. They were his measure of eternity, a reminder that even emperors were but riders passing through time. The soundscape of the camp was a quiet symphony. Horses snorted softly in the darkness, their hooves shifting against the earth. From the distance came the faint barking of dogs, guardians against the night. The fires crackled low, sending whispers through the felt walls. And always, above all, there was the wind, sometimes a gentle sigh, sometimes a steady rush, as though the breath of the world itself moved endlessly across the grasslands. In this atmosphere, the Khan rested. He was not a man of idleness, but of rhythm. After storms of conquest came intervals of silence. After the breaking of cities came the mending of the spirit. His rest was not merely personal, but imperial, for in his stillness the vast machinery of the empire also paused, drawing breath before it moved again. Thus the camp lingered upon the steppe, a great heartbeat slowing after exertion. Fires burned, food was shared, songs were sung in quiet cadence. Children played in the dust with small carved figures of horse and rider. The Khan watched, and in his watching, the empire itself seemed to settle. And so the story begins, not in battle, but in calm. It begins with a man who had carried nations within his shadow, yet who now sat in silence, surrounded by warmth, by kin, by the breath of horses and the endless wind. The conquest was complete. What remained in these hours was the rarest treasure of all, rest. The steppe was vast enough that even after years of campaigns and marches, it seemed never to diminish. Each new season gave to the grasses a different shade, a different temper of wind, a different chorus of birds overhead. To the warriors who had ridden beside their Khan, the land was a companion as enduring as any comrade. It carried their hoofbeats and accepted their rest. It yielded no judgment, but only the endless horizon. When the camp was settled in a place of stillness, life unfolded at a gentler pace. Horses grazed across the slopes, their manes rippling as the wind passed over them like a hand across water. Sheep and goats wandered close to the fires of the encampment, their bells tinkling with a sound both sharp and soothing. The people moved among them with practiced ease, tending to herds, repairing harnesses, carrying water from streams that meandered through the grassland. Each act was ordinary, yet within the circle of the Khan's presence, even the smallest motions felt like pieces of a greater design. The Khan himself often rose early, though not always to ride. In these pauses of conquest, he walked among his people. The air was cool upon his face, heavy with the smell of dew-soaked grass. Warriors bowed as he passed, their gestures silent, yet their eyes filled with respect. Children paused in their play, wide-eyed at the sight of him, then scampered back to their games when he had moved on. The women of the camp continued their tasks without interruption, though their movements grew quieter as he passed, a stillness forming naturally around his figure. There was dignity in these wanderings. He was not a man seeking display, but rather a presence observing, gathering, holding the world in silence. His gaze traveled across the herds, across the clustered gurs, across the faint smoke rising into the morning air. To him, this was not idleness. It was the empire itself breathing. Within his dwelling, the Khan kept the symbols of his victories near at hand. They were not gaudy treasures, but objects imbued with weight. A sword of Damascus steel, captured in far campaigns, rested upon a chest. A saddle inlaid with silver, taken from a defeated prince, stood propped by the wall. Silks from China were folded carefully in wooden chests, their colors still bright despite long journeys. These were reminders not of vanity, but of reach, of the far sweep of his hand across the world. Yet he did not surround himself only with spoils. He sought also the continuity of custom, the old rhythms of the steppe. The hearth fire burned at the center, as it always had. The felt walls bore the same patterns woven by women of his kin. The bowls and vessels, though some were foreign, held the same milk, the same broth, the same offerings that his forefathers had tasted. To the Khan, rest was not to abandon tradition, but to anchor himself more deeply within it. His wives, gathered according to their stations, formed a circle of presence around him. Some were companions from early years, their faces lined gently by age, their bond strengthened by long memory. Others were younger, daughters of noble families offered as alliance, their beauty fresh, their manners deliberate. They moved about him with quiet assurance, some attending to garments, others pouring drink, others simply sitting in stillness near his place of rest. Each carried her own role, her own thread in the fabric of lineage. Among the attendants, songs rose at times, low, melodic, unhurried. They sang of rivers and mountains, of journeys taken and journeys yet to be. Their voices blended with the crackle of the fire, creating a sound that was less performance than atmosphere, a weaving of human tone with the sounds of the steppe. The Khan listened without interruption, his gaze fixed upon the flames, his breath slow, his body heavy with repose. Outside, the seasons shaped the hours. In late summer, the grasses grew thick, their tips brushing the knees of riders, their golden waves bending with the wind. The air smelled of ripeness, of seeds scattering across the ground, of distant fires where meals were prepared. In autumn, the nights grew longer, colder, sharper. Frost clung to the earth at dawn, and the breath of horses steamed into the air. The Khan's robes grew heavier, lined with furs from the far mountains, and the fires within the gurs burned longer into the night. These shifts of season guided the rhythm of his rest. There was no haste, only adjustment, a slow turning of life in harmony with the land. When days were warm, he reclined with doors open, letting the air move freely through his dwelling, carrying the scent of grass and horse. When cold winds swept down from the north, the walls were tightened, the felt thickened, the fires built higher. Rest was not the absence of motion, but the measured shaping of life to the conditions given. Among the warriors, rest carried its own rituals. Weapons were oiled and repaired, not for immediate use, but as a gesture of readiness. Horses were brushed and trained, their hooves checked carefully, their saddles mended. Men sat together, sharing bowls of kumis, speaking in low tones of battles past. Some recounted tales of bravery, others remembered comrades lost. Laughter was rare but not absent, rising in sudden bursts before fading back into the calm. Always there was the sense that time was being stretched, elongated, made soft by stillness. Children, meanwhile, played freely. They raced across the camp, their feet pounding the dust, their laughter bright against the steady rhythm of adult life. They carried small bows, arrows tipped with bone, or carved figures of riders mounted upon horses of wood. Their games were imitations of conquest, yet softened by innocence. The Khan sometimes watched them from a distance, his eyes narrowing not with disapproval, but with thought.
For in their play he saw the seeds of the future, the echo of what had been, the shadow of what would come. There were also quieter rituals of legacy. In the evenings, as the fires burned low, the Khan sat with his sons. They gathered not as children before a father, but as heirs before a figure of immense authority. He spoke sparingly, his words chosen with care, each sentence carrying the weight of both memory and command. His voice was steady, unhurried, like the flow of a river that had carved valleys through stone. His sons listened with stillness, their faces solemn, their bodies motionless, their eyes fixed upon the flame. The daughters, too, were part of this circle of instruction. Though their fates were to be bound in alliances, their presence carried significance. They learned to listen, to observe, to move with grace. The Khan regarded them not with softness alone, but with the recognition that their roles would stretch the reach of empire as surely armies. Their marriages would knit together clans and kingdoms, creating bonds as enduring as conquest itself.
Within the Khan's rest was also a sense of continuity with the spirits of the past. At certain intervals, offerings were made. Bowls of milk poured upon the ground, meats burned in fire, words murmured to the heavens. These gestures honored ancestors, the unseen guardians of the steppe. The Khan participated with the same solemnity as his warriors, his head bowed, his hands steady. In these acts, the empire was not only of flesh and blood, but of spirit, of lineage stretching beyond memory. At night, when the camp grew quiet, the sky unfolded in its vastness. The Milky Way stretched like a pale river across the darkness, stars glittering with a brilliance unsoftened by smoke or lamp. The Khan sometimes stepped outside his dwelling and stood upon the bare earth, wrapped in heavy robes, his breath misting in the cold. He gazed upward, silent, still. To him, the stars were a reminder of measure, of scale, of the smallness of men and the vastness of eternity. Yet they were also companions, constant above every campaign, every journey, every rest. In these hours, the wind was the dominant voice. It whispered across the grasses, stirred the edges of tents, carried the faint scent of ash and wool. Dogs barked occasionally, their calls sharp against the silence. Horses shifted in their sleep, their hooves thudding softly against the earth. But the overall sound was one of calm, of a world resting in rhythm with its ruler. Thus the days of rest extended, unbroken by urgency. There was no need to ride, no call to battle, no march across distant plains. Instead, there was continuity. Meals prepared, fires tended, herds moved from one pasture to another. Life unfolded as it had for generations, yet with the added weight of empire. An empire that stretched far beyond the horizon, yet returned always to the steppe, to this circle of gurs, to this hearth where the Khan sat in stillness. For those around him, these moments were treasured. Warriors knew that campaigns would come again, that hardship and death would return. Women knew that journeys would resume, that alliances would shift, that families would be parted. Children knew only the present, yet their laughter carried the unspoken knowledge that peace was fleeting. And so, within this encampment, rest was not simply pause. It was a sacred interlude, a breath between storms, a gift carved out of the endless march of history. The Khan, in his repose, embodied this rhythm. He did not rush, he did not falter, he did not abandon the weight of empire even in silence. He carried it in the way he sat, in the way he drank, in the way he gazed into the fire. His rest was the empire's rest. His stillness was the stillness of countless riders, countless herds, countless families scattered across the vastness. And so, as days turned into weeks, the steppe held its breath. Fires burned, smoke curled into the sky, songs rose and faded, children played, warriors sharpened blades without urgency. The Khan rested, and the empire, vast and unyielding, rested with him. The hours of the Khan's repose were not only marked by feasts and the warmth of companionship. There were also stretches of time when solitude became his closest attendant. In those intervals, he sought not the voices of others, but the quiet that lay beyond the camp, where the steppe itself seemed to breathe with a rhythm older than empires. When dawn broke pale over the horizon, casting a thin band of silver across the land, the Khan would sometimes rise before the camp stirred. Wrapped in heavy robes, he walked beyond the circle of gurs, past the tethered horses and the watchful guards, until the only sound was the crunch of grass beneath his boots and the low rush of wind. The earth felt vast beneath him, as though it stretched unbroken into eternity. To stand alone upon it was to feel both the weight and the release of power, the reminder that even the greatest conqueror was but a rider upon the endless plain. The air was sharp in these mornings, filled with the smell of frost, of cold iron, of damp soil. Far above, the sky deepened from indigo into pale blue, and the stars withdrew one by one. The Khan would pause at such moments, his breath visible in the cold, his eyes steady upon the horizon. It was not prayer in the manner of priests, but a communion of silence. He did not seek answers, he only stood in recognition of forces larger than his own, of time moving steadily forward, of ancestors watching unseen. Within the camp, rituals of remembrance were prepared with care. The shamans, their garments adorned with bones, feathers, and strips of colored cloth, moved with deliberate steps. Their faces were weathered, their hair streaked with gray, their voices low and resonant. They carried drums whose surfaces bore the marks of years, and when struck, those drums released a sound that echoed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Smoke rose from small fires, where herbs crackled, filling the air with scents of sage and juniper. The Khan sat among these ceremonies with composure, neither above nor apart. He listened as the shamans sang, in voices that wavered between chant and wind, invoking spirits of sky and land, honoring ancestors who had once ridden the same plains. His face remained steady, but his gaze carried depth, as though he followed those voices into a space beyond the reach of ordinary sight. After such rites, he often remained in quiet conversation with the elders. These men were not warriors in the bloom of youth, but figures marked by years, their voices softened by time. They spoke not of campaigns, but of cycles, of weather, of the movements of stars, of the turning of herds across pastures. Their words carried the wisdom of endurance, of how a people survived when armies and empires had risen and fallen. The Khan listened with patience, his hands resting upon his knees, his eyes fixed upon the fire. For even one who had subdued kingdoms needed the counsel of those who understood the steppe. There were times, too, when he summoned scribes from lands he had conquered. They came from cities with walls, from places of learning where parchment and ink replaced memory and song. In the quiet of his gur, they read from scrolls, their voices steady, their language foreign, yet interpreted by those who stood nearby. The Khan listened as they spoke of histories written centuries before, of rulers long dead, of empires that had risen in might only to crumble into dust. His face revealed little, but inwardly he measured their words against his own life, weighing what endured and what vanished.
In such hours, repose became reflection. The Khan did not merely rest his body, he rested his spirit within the vast frame of history. He considered the lands he had crossed, the rivers he had forded, the cities that had bowed before him. Yet his thoughts were not boastful. They were steady, deliberate, touched with the awareness that power was vast, yet fragile, immense, yet fleeting. Sometimes, as night deepened, he would remain awake while the camp slept. The fire burned low, sending shadows across the curved walls of his dwelling. Outside, the wind pressed softly, its voice constant, like an ancient companion murmuring without pause. The Khan lay upon furs, his eyes open, his mind wandering through memories of battles and journeys. He recalled the faces of men who had ridden beside him and now lay beneath the earth. He recalled the first nights when his people were few, when hunger pressed hard and hope was uncertain. To remember was not sorrow, but grounding, as though each memory was a stone laid into the foundation of what he had built. In these solitary hours, women sometimes entered, carrying bowls of warm drink or arranging furs more closely around him. Their movements were quiet, respectful, filled with the grace of those who served not merely a man, but an empire embodied. They did not speak, and he did not need words. Their presence was enough, a reminder that even in solitude he was not alone. The Khan's rest was also a time of legacy, of ensuring that what had been built would not vanish with his passing. He thought of his sons, their strengths and their rivalries, their hunger for power, their need for guidance. He measured each one in his mind, seeing where wisdom must be given, where restraint must be taught, where trust might falter. In his stillness, he considered the shape of inheritance, not as a matter of sentiment, but as the structure of empire itself. Beyond his family, he also thought of his warriors, the thousands who followed him, bound not by walls or coin, but by loyalty. He had given them victory, but he had also given them rest. He had demanded their strength, but he had also shared their hardship. In the quiet of his dwelling he remembered them as more than instruments. They were men, flesh and spirit, whose lives had become woven with his own. To rest was to honor them, to allow them to breathe before they were called once more into the storm. The steppe itself played a part in this repose. Its vastness carried a stillness that no city could provide. The grasses swayed endlessly, the rivers moved with steady rhythm, the sky stretched without limit. To lie upon the earth and gaze upward was to feel small, yet also to feel part of something immeasurable. The Khan, for all his power, knew this truth, that the steppe was eternal, and he but a rider who passed across its surface for a time. As weeks unfolded, the camp grew deeply settled. The routines became softer, slower, filled with an ease that contrasted sharply with the urgency of campaigns. The Khan allowed this rhythm, for he knew it was not weakness, but strength. An army that never rested would falter. A people without pause would break. Rest was the hidden pillar upon which Conquest stood. And so, in the calm after the storm, he found not only comfort but clarity. His solitude gave him vision, the rituals gave him grounding, the council of elders gave him wisdom, the songs of women gave him continuity. In the balance of all these, his reign endured, not only through might, but through the quiet strength of rest. In the weeks of calm, when the winds of the steppe blew steady but unhurried, the Khan sometimes commanded that feasts be prepared. These were not the hurried meals of a moving army, nor the quiet suppers of wearied travelers, but great gatherings that filled the encampment with light, with sound, with the weight of shared abundance. The preparations began early. Fires were built high, their smoke rising in tall columns visible from far across the grassland. Cauldrons of bronze were set upon stones, filled with water drawn from rivers and streams, and into them were placed great portions of mutton and horseflesh. The scent of boiling meat spread quickly, mingling with the sharper aromas of herbs gathered by women, and the deep earthy smell of wood smoke. Leather skins were filled with fermented mare's milk, their contents stirred until froth rose. Vessels of wine and grain drink, brought from distant lands, were set in readiness. The warriors cleaned their armor, though not for battle. They polished the plates until they shone in the firelight, arranged their helmets on wooden stands, and set aside their bows with reverence. When they entered the feast, they wore robes of wool and silk, gifts from conquered lands, dyed in shades of crimson, deep blue, and soft gold. Their hair was bound neatly, their boots polished, their movements measured. They came not as riders of war, but as honored companions of their sovereign. The women of the encampment adorned themselves in equal splendor. Their hair, dark and gleaming, was braided and interwoven with silver rings, beads of bone or polished stones. Robes of silk were drawn close at the waist, their sleeves wide, and their hems embroidered with patterns of rivers, mountains, and stars. Some wore jewelry crafted from the plunder of distant lands, bracelets of jade, necklaces of pearls, earrings of hammered gold. Yet beneath the finery, their presence carried the same grace as in ordinary days, quiet, assured, flowing like water through the hall of tents. At the center of the feast stood the Khan's dwelling, larger and higher than the rest. Its felt walls were reinforced with patterned cloth from foreign cities, its roof pole adorned with banners that fluttered in the breeze. Inside, furs covered the ground in thick layers, and tables of wood, low yet broad, were laid with bowls and platters. The hearth burned brightly, its flames reaching upward in steady rhythm, its warmth filling the space with comfort. When all was ready, the people gathered. The warriors entered in groups, their steps deliberate, their voices hushed until they found their places. Women moved gracefully among them, carrying vessels of drink, setting bowls of steaming broth before each guest. Children hovered at the edges, their eyes wide, absorbing the splendor, learning by watching. The Khan entered last. He came with measured stride, his robe heavy with fur, his belt clasped with metal that glimmered in the firelight. His presence filled the space, and though he spoke no words of command, silence spread naturally through the assembly. He took his place upon cushions at the center, and only then did the feast begin. The first sounds were those of pouring and serving. Liquid splashed into wooden bowls, meat was set upon platters, the crackle of fire mingled with the murmurs of gratitude. Warriors lifted their bowls, drank deeply, and passed them on for refilling. The Khan himself raised a vessel, drank with steady hand, and set it down upon the low table before him. With that act, voices rose more freely, and the hall of the jur filled with sound. The feast was a slow unfolding. Platters of roasted meat were carried in, the flesh tender, its juices rich. Bones were split, the marrow scooped and shared. Stews were ladled into bowls, their steam rising in fragrant clouds. Bread from conquered cities was brought forth, its texture strange to the step but welcomed for its novelty. Fruits preserved in honey appeared in small dishes, their sweetness rare and treasured. Every bite was heavy with meaning, a reminder of lands taken, of wealth gathered, of plenty secured. As the people ate, music began. At first it was a single instrument, a horsehead fiddle. Its strings bowed in slow, resonant tones. The sound was deep and mournful, like the voice of the steppe itself. Then drums joined, their steady beat echoing the pulse of the earth. Flutes followed, their high notes weaving like birds across the air. Together they created a tapestry of sound, not hurried, not loud, but flowing, steady, carrying the listeners into a state between wakefulness and dream.
Dancers entered the space. Women in long robes moved with steps that seemed both delicate and strong, their arms sweeping like the wings of cranes. Men followed, their motions broader, echoing the strength of riders and the swiftness of horses. The firelight played upon their faces, upon the silver threads woven into their garments, upon the ornaments that jingled softly as they turned. Their dance was not of frivolity, but of reverence, a gesture to the Khan, to the steppe, to the ancestors who watched from beyond. The Khan observed in silence. His eyes followed the dancers. His gaze lingered upon the musicians. His hands rested lightly upon his knees. He did not smile broadly, nor did he laugh. Yet his presence was one of approval, of recognition. He allowed the feast to flow around him, to envelop his people in sound, in taste, in warmth. His repose was not apart from theirs, but shared through every vessel lifted, every song sung, every movement of the dance. As the hours deepened, gifts were brought forth. Envoys from allied clans approached, carrying tokens of loyalty.
fine horses with glossy coats, furs from distant forests, vessels of gold and silver. They laid these before the Khan, bowed low, and stepped back. He accepted each gift with measured nods, his eyes steady, his gestures deliberate. In return, he offered gifts of his own, weapons crafted by his smiths, robes lined with fur, horses of rare endurance. The exchange was more than generosity. It was the binding of loyalty, the weaving of threads that held the empire together. Songs rose louder as the feast continued. Groups of warriors sang in chorus, their voices rough yet powerful, recounting battles and victories. Women sang in softer tones, their melodies weaving tales of rivers, of stars, of eternal return. Together, the voices created a sound that filled the jur until it seemed the very walls trembled with resonance. The children, emboldened by the atmosphere, crept closer. They were allowed to sit near their fathers, to taste from the bowls, to listen to the songs. Their eyes shone with wonder, their small hands clutching morsels of bread or fruit. For them, these feasts were not only moments of joy, but of instruction. They learned what it meant to belong to the people of the Khan, to be heirs of conquest, to be guardians of tradition. As night deepened, the feast did not fade into chaos. Instead, it slowed, softened, became gentler. The bowls emptied, the music grew quieter, the dancers moved more slowly. Some guests reclined upon cushions, their eyes half closed and their breaths deep and even. Others murmured in low tones, sharing memories, speaking of distant kin. The fire burned lower, its glow steady, its heat comforting. At the center, the Khan remained. His face was calm, his body still, his gaze distant. He had presided not through command, but through presence. His repose was the repose of the gathering. His strength was the strength they all shared. When the last notes of music faded, the shamans entered once more. They struck their drums in slow rhythm, calling the spirits to witness the close of the feast. Smoke rose again, carrying the scent of herbs into the night. The people bowed their heads, their voices stilled, their breaths aligned with the beat of the drums. It was a gesture of gratitude, of acknowledgement, of connection to the unseen. Then the assembly dispersed. Warriors stepped out into the cold air, their breath rising in white clouds. Women gathered the bowls, folded the cloths, banked the fire. Children were carried in arms, were led by the hand back to their beds. The camp returned to silence, its only sounds, the rustle of felt walls and the endless murmur of the wind. The Khan withdrew to his dwelling. He lay upon furs, his body heavy, his eyes steady upon the roof pole above. Through the small opening, he could see the stars, bright and unnumbered, spread across the blackness. The sound of the feast still lingered faintly in his mind. The voices, the music, the beat of the drums. Slowly, the rhythm faded, leaving only the silence of the steppe, the silence of rest. And in that silence, the empire itself seemed to breathe with him, vast and steady, bound together not only by conquest, but by shared repose. The life of the Khan did not remain always within the boundaries of a single encampment. The empire he ruled was vast, stretching across deserts, mountains, and rivers without number, and the rhythm of his existence followed the rhythm of movement. To rest in one place was only a pause. Soon the call of the horizon returned, and the camp stirred to follow. Yet even in the long journeys across the steppe, there were moments of stillness, times when the great ruler and his people found repose beneath the endless sky. The breaking of camp was itself a kind of ceremony, carried out with patient order. At dawn, when the first faint glow touched the eastern horizon, fires were stirred back into life. Women rose quietly, wrapping their robes against the chill, and set about folding blankets, tying bundles, and fastening ropes. The felt walls of the jurs were rolled carefully, layer by layer, until the great dwellings collapsed into compact, heavy loads. Wooden frames were stacked and bound with leather straps, ready to be lifted upon carts drawn by oxen or camels. The sounds of departure filled the air, the lowing of animals, the squeak of wheels, the shouts of herdsmen guiding their flocks. Horses stamped the frosted ground, their breath white in the morning cold. Warriors moved with steady purpose, strapping saddles upon their mounts, adjusting weapons at their belts, and securing supplies to their packs. The entire camp was like a living organism, each part moving in harmony, each gesture practiced through generations of nomadic life. The Khan himself rose later than some, yet still early. His attendants brought forth his garments, rich yet functional, robes of fur against the wind, boots of leather softened by oil, belts clasped with metal fittings. His saddle, heavier and broader than most, was placed on a horse chosen for endurance, its coat sleek, its muscles strong. He emerged from his dwelling with measured step, his face calm, his eyes scanning the horizon. He did not shout commands. The sight of him alone set the pace of the day. When all was ready, the columns began to move. First went the herds, guided by youths and older men, the sound of bells tied to the animals' necks echoing across the plain. Next came the carts, creaking beneath the weight of jurs, stores of grain, vessels of drink, and chests of treasures gathered in conquest. Women walked beside them, steady and unhurried, guiding the animals with long poles, soothing the children when they cried. After them rode the warriors, their armor covered with cloaks, their bows slung across their backs, their faces turned toward the road ahead. In the center, the Khan rode with his guard, his bearing upright, his gaze unwavering. Behind him trailed other carts laden with gifts, standards, and the banners that marked his presence. The march was not hurried. The pace was that of endurance, not of haste. Hooves struck the earth in rhythm, wheels turned in steady crick, voices rose and fell with the wind. The land unfolded without end, rolling hills, wide rivers, sparse groves of trees and fields of dry grass bending beneath the breeze. Clouds drifted across the sky, their shadows passing slowly over the moving host. The empire in motion was a sight vast and solemn, but within it there was calm. During these marches, rest was found in the journey itself. The sway of the saddle, the endless horizon, the repetition of sound, all became a kind of rhythm that lulled the mind into stillness. The Khan, though burdened with thought, often allowed himself to sink into this rhythm. He listened to the sound of hooves, to the call of birds overhead, to the whisper of grass against the wind. He felt the warmth of his horse beneath him, the pressure of the reins in his hands, the weight of the sky above. In these moments, his world was not only over men, but in harmony with the land itself.
When the sun reached its height, the host paused. The carts were drawn into a circle, the animals released to graze, fires built swiftly from gathered wood or dried dung. Women set cauldrons upon stones, filled them with meat and water, stirred until steam rose in fragrant clouds. Warriors reclined upon the grass, removing their helmets, loosening their belts, stretching their limbs. Some sharpened blades or repaired saddles, their hands working with quiet precision. Others lay upon their backs, eyes closed, letting the sun warm their faces. The Khan ate sparingly during these pauses. A bowl of broth, a slice of meat, a cup of drink sufficed. He sat among his attendants, not apart, but not entirely mingled. His presence was both near and distant, like the mountain that looms above the plain. He listened more than he spoke, his gaze wandering across the horizon as if measuring the distance yet to be traveled. The simple act of eating in the open air, of feeling the grass beneath his boots, of hearing the murmur of his people around him, was itself a form of repose. When the pause ended, the march resumed. The shadows lengthened, the air cooled, the lights softened into gold. Birds wheeled in the sky, their cries sharp and fleeting. The herds moved more slowly, their bells ringing in lower tones. The warriors' songs, low and steady, carried across the host, recounting battles and ancestors, filling the air with rhythm. The Khan rode at the center, his eyes fixed forward, his body swaying gently with the motion of his horse. The journey was long, yet the calm of its constancy was a balm to mind and body alike. As evening approached, the host sought a place to rest. The choice was deliberate, a rise of ground near water, sheltered by hills or trees, open enough for vigilance. Once chosen, the work of settling began. Carts were halted, their loads unbound, the frames of gurs raised swiftly, felt drawn tight, ropes secured. Fires sprang to life in circles, their smoke rising into the cooling air. Herds were gathered and penned, warriors posted to watch the perimeters, children sent to fetch water or gather twigs. Within an hour, the moving host had become a village of felt and flame. In the evening camp, rest deepened. Fires crackled, sending sparks into the dusk. Shadows of people stretched long upon the ground, their movements slow, their voices softened. Cauldrons simmered once more, their aroma filling the air with comfort. The sky darkened, the first stars appeared, the moon lifted her pale face above the horizon. The land grew quiet, except for the murmurs of the camp, the calls of night birds, the occasional snort of a horse. The Khan sat before his tent, the firelight flickering upon his face. He leaned back upon cushions, his robe heavy upon his shoulders, his hands resting upon his knees. Around him sat a small circle of guards in attendance, silent and less spoken to, their presence steady, their eyes watchful. Before him stretched the camp, fires glowing like constellations, people moving like shadows, the sounds of laughter, song, and the cries of children. In such moment, repose was not the absence of care, but its transformation. The burdens of rule did not vanish, yet they softened, became distant, like hills seen through mist. The Khan breathed deeply of the cool air, listened to the crackle of flame, watched the sparks drift upward to join the stars. He felt the weight of conquest, not as a stone upon his back, but as a vast plain beneath his feet, steady and enduring. Later in the night, when most of the camp had grown silent, the Khan often remained awake. He would walk among the fires, his steps slow, his gaze upon the sky. Warriors stirred at his passing, bowing their heads, then returned to rest. Children slept beside their mothers, wrapped in blankets, their small faces peaceful. The animals lay upon the ground, their breaths deep, their bodies still. The entire camp seemed like a single being, breathing together beneath the stars. At last he would return to his dwelling. Inside, furs lay thick upon the ground, cushions arranged with care. The air scented with smoke and herbs. He removed his boots, loosened his robe, and laid down upon the furs. The sounds of the camp were faint beyond the felt walls. The crackle of fire, the distant call of a night bird, the low murmur of wind. His eyes lingered upon the roof pole above, then closed slowly. Sleep came not as a sudden fall, but as a gentle descent, like the slow settling of snow upon the plain. Thus the days of travel passed, each alike, yet each unique.
The march itself was a rhythm of life, the camp a place of repose, the horizon both a destination and a companion. The Khan found his rest not only in stillness, but in movement, not only in dwelling, but in journey. The empire was vast, yet wherever he paused, wherever he lay his head, the silence of the steppe enfolded him. And so he rested, even in the heart of motion, his spirit attuned to the land, his body carried by its endless expanse, his mind steady as the sky above.
The steppe, though vast and enduring, was not the only companion of the Khan. There were places where the land changed its voice, where hills rose into mountains, and rivers cut deep into the earth, bringing with them a different kind of stillness. In these rare locations, the Khan found a unique form of repose, a serenity that the endless plains could not offer. The mountains appeared gradually, their slopes softened by grass and scattered trees, yet growing taller and more solemn as the journey advanced. Rocks, dark and ancient, jutted from the earth like sentinels. The wind carried a cooler note here, scented with pine and the subtle sweetness of wild herbs. Streams tumbled from heights above, their waters crystal clear, glinting like shards of silver in the sun. The sound of falling water, constant and gentle, provided a rhythm that was different from the wind across the plains, a rhythm that invited reflection and calm. When the Khan's host arrived near one of these rivers, the decision to pause was deliberate. The carts were drawn carefully onto level ground, the animals released to graze along the banks, and the gears were raised with the practiced efficiency of long experience. Fires were lit in safe hollows, stones stacked to contain their heat, smoke curling upward into the open sky. Women and children moved among the tents, gathering herbs and wild fruits, preparing meals with quiet grace. Warriors set their weapons aside, tending to their mounts, bathing them in the clear water, brushing their coats until they shone in the afternoon sun. The Khan himself sought the water immediately. He dismounted slowly, allowing the leather of his boots to brush against the grass, feeling the coolness beneath his feet. He approached the riverbank, where stones were smooth from the passage of time and the gentle rush of water. He knelt briefly, letting his hands cut the stream, letting the cold water touch his face and wrists. There was a freshness here that was unlike anything found on the steppe, a sense of the world itself moving slowly, purposefully, beyond the reach of any human command. Here, in the presence of mountains and rivers, the Khan found his solitude most complete. The sound of the stream mingled with the rustle of leaves, with the whisper of wind through pine needles, and with the distant calls of birds. In this chorus, the mind could wander freely, yet not with distraction. Thoughts flowed, deliberate and unhurried, of campaigns past, of lands secured, of alliances forged, and of the duties yet to come. Each idea was placed carefully, measured against the calm of the natural world, absorbed slowly into the rhythm of observation. Meals in these moments were simple. Fresh water from the river was sipped from wooden bowls, bread brought from the carts torn into small portions, pieces of roasted meat shared quietly among attendants. The Khan rarely ate quickly. Each bite was deliberate, each sip mindful. Around him, women moved softly, placing bowls, adjusting furs for warmth, offering small gestures of comfort without intrusion. Warriors rested nearby, their eyes attentive but calm, listening to the water, to the wind, to the quiet that stretched across the mountainside. The night approaching, the beauty of these places deepened. The sun dipped behind distant peaks, casting long shadows over the river and the slopes. The water reflected the sky in hues of gold and purple, rippling gently in the current. Trees bent softly in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering secrets of the forest.
The air cooled, carrying the scent of pine resin, of damp earth, of flowers and herbs crushed underfoot. The Khan would sit upon a flat stone, blankets draped about him, and watch the transition from day to night, his eyes tracing the stars as they emerged, one by one, in the deepening sky. The rituals of memory and tradition were not absent in these quiet places. Small fires were lit along the riverbank, smoke rising in thin, steady lines. Offerings were made, milk poured into the water, meat placed upon stones, words spoken to the spirits of mountain and river. Shamans moved among the fires, striking their drums lightly, creating a heartbeat that blended with the rushing stream. The Khan listened, silent, steady, acknowledging the unseen forces that sustained the land, the people, and the continuity of his reign. Sometimes he would leave the camp entirely for the solitude of the mountains. He walked along narrow paths, careful with each step, feeling the solidity of rock beneath his boots, listening to the distant sound of falling water. At times he paused to observe small animals, a deer drinking from a hidden pool, a hare moving cautiously among the rocks, birds gliding over the ridges. These moments were not leisure in the ordinary sense, but a deepening of awareness, a communion with the world beyond human dominion. At night he would lie upon furs near the river, the gentle current singing beside him. The air was cold but tempered by blankets and furs, and the soft sounds of the camp reached him faintly, carried on the wind. He observed the reflection of the moon in the water, the silvered surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple of fish or the drift of leaves. In this quiet, his thoughts flowed slowly, his body relaxed, and sleep came like the settling of leaves on a calm stream, gradual, complete, and restorative. The people of the camp adapted to these places with similar reverence. Warriors moved quietly at night, tending fires and ensuring safety. Women gathered water, prepared food, and kept watch over children. The young learned quickly how to move with discretion and awareness, absorbing the rhythms of mountain and river into the practices of daily life. All were conscious that even in such beauty, the presence of the Khan demanded a certain order and respect, a harmony between freedom and discipline. Occasionally, gifts and tokens of alliance were received in these remote stops. Envoys from distant clans brought small horses, intricately worked jewelry, finely dyed fabrics, and vessels of drink. They were led to the Khan, who accepted each gift with measured attention, nodding in acknowledgement, offering in return words of favor and gestures of generosity. Even here, in the seeming isolation of mountains and rivers, the obligations of rule persisted, yet they were softened by the serenity of the surroundings. The Khan's sons sometimes accompanied him on these excursions. They walked along the banks, observing the water, studying the rocks, learning to measure the land with careful steps. In their eyes he saw both curiosity and the weight of expectation. He spoke little, allowing them to learn through observation, through the rhythm of nature, and through the quiet example of his presence. Lessons were subtle, the patience of water, the endurance of stone, the constancy of wind. These, more than words, were the instruction he sought to impart. Music and song were part of repose even here, though quieter, more intimate. Women played soft tunes upon the horsehead fiddle, their tones echoing across the valley, blending with the murmur of the river. Warriors sang low chants, recounting stories of ancestors and heroes, their voices melding with the sounds of the forest. The Khan listened, unmoving, allowing the resonance of nature and human effort to become a single harmonious whole. The mornings in these places were cool, filled with the scent of dew and pine. The Khan would rise with the light, feeling the cold upon his face, listening to the distant rush of water. Meals were simple, sometimes taken alone by the riverbank, other times shared with attendants. The people moved with deliberation, their work slowed by the richness of surroundings, yet efficient in its quiet rhythm. The mountains taught patience, the rivers taught persistence. Through them the Khan found a deeper understanding of the endurance required to hold an empire. As days passed, the camp might remain for weeks, though never for long. The mountains and rivers provided replenishment, lessons, and moments of reflection. The Khan's presence infused the surroundings with calm. His stillness became a mirror of the steady, enduring flow of the land. Warriors and women adapted their routines to match the slower tempo. Children absorbed the lessons of nature, and the host as a whole moved in harmony with the rhythms of river and stone. When the time came to leave, the process mirrored the arrival, deliberate, careful, respectful. Carts were dismantled, animals gathered, fires extinguished. The Khan would take one last walk along the river, his eyes tracing its bends, his hands brushing the surface of water or the moss upon stones. He lingered, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition. Every place of rest had its lessons, and every pause added depth to the continuity of his reign.
As the host moved onward, following the contours of the land back to the open plains, the memories of the mountains and rivers remained. Even in motion, in the sway of the saddle, in the constant rhythm of hoofbeats, the Khan carried the calm he had absorbed, the cool touch of water, the whisper of pine, the reflection of moonlight on still pools. These became part of the larger pattern of repose, intertwined with the routines of camp life, the rituals of memory, and the enduring rhythms of the steppe. And so, in the folds of mountains and the murmurs of rivers, the Khan found his peace, a harmony that echoed beyond the plains, beyond conquest, beyond the reach of time itself. Winter arrived upon the steppe with deliberate inevitability. The days grew short, and the sun, low on the horizon, cast long shadows that stretched across the white expanse. Frost clung to every blade of grass, and the wind carried a sharpness that pierced through even the heaviest of furs. The Khan's camp, accustomed to the rhythms of the warmer months, adjusted to the cold with careful diligence, creating spaces of warmth, comfort, and stillness in the midst of winter's austere beauty. The mornings were bitter. The Khan would rise to a world transformed. Snow blanketed the ground in unbroken sheets, ice glazed the rivers, and the breath of both man and animal rose in pale clouds. Fires had been banked the previous night, embers glowing beneath ashes, ready to be stirred into flame. Women moved swiftly through the tents, shaking snow from the outer coverings, arranging furs, and ensuring that every dwelling retained warmth. Children huddled close to their mothers, their small faces flushed by the cold, learning early the patterns of endurance. The Khan himself observed these mornings with quiet attention. He would don layers of furs, leather boots softened and insulated, and gloves of thick material. His robe lined with sheepskin provided weight and warmth. Yet even with these protections, he felt the cold in his fingers and feet, the crisp bite upon his face. He welcomed it as a reminder of the season's reality, as a signal to move deliberately, to honor both the land and the lives within it. Meals in the winter were heartier, designed to sustain body and spirit against the chill. Large cauldrons were filled with thick stews of meat, grains, and root vegetables gathered from distant lands or stored from previous seasons. Hot drinks, spiced lightly, were passed around in wooden bowls, steaming in the cold air. The Khan ate with calm, deliberate motions, often sharing portions with attendants or warriors who had traveled long distances from outlying tents. Even in the simplicity of sustenance, there was a ritual, a mindful recognition of warmth, nourishment, and the effort required to maintain life in a harsh climate. The steppe itself, covered in snow, took on a silent majesty. Footsteps were muffled, and the wind carried sound differently, making the slightest movement of horse or man audible across the plain. Trees, sparse and wind-bent, were coated with frost, their branches glistening in the pale light. The rivers, frozen over in parts, mirrored the sky with clarity, their surfaces still, except for occasional cracks or eddies. The Khan would sometimes leave the warmth of his dwelling to observe this transformation, walking slowly across the snow, feeling the bite of cold and the firmness of frozen ground beneath his boots. Within the camp, life adapted to the season with a careful balance of activity and repose. Fires were built in central locations, surrounded by benches and furs. Warriors repaired gear, tending leather and metal to ensure survival during long patrols or hunts. Women prepared meals, mended clothing, and cared for children, their movements quiet and purposeful. The Khan walked among them, observing without intrusion, acknowledging their efforts with slight nods or measured words, his presence alone offering reassurance. Hunting became both sustenance and ritual in the winter months. The Khan and his attendants would rise before dawn, when the air was sharp and the landscape pristine. Horses, accustomed to cold, moved silently through snow, hoofs making crisp sounds against frozen earth. The Khan watched carefully, his eyes trained to detect movement of small animals, hares, foxes, even deer in deeper woods. The hunts were deliberate, not hurried. They provided nourishment, yes, but they also reinforced patience, observation, and the understanding of survival in extremes. Evening brought the greatest reprieve. Fires glowed warmly within the gers, smoke curling through the small openings. The Khan sat upon furs, blankets layered to guard against cold, fires banked nearby for warmth. Women offered hot drinks and bowls of stew, arranging cushions so that warmth was shared and comfort ensured. The light of the fire reflected in the polished metal of the Khan's belt and in the eyes of warriors resting nearby. Music, though subdued in winter, remained an essential comfort. The soft tones of the horsehead fiddle, the low chants of warriors, the gentle hum of women's songs, all carried through the tents, mingling with the crackle of fire. The Khan listened with his eyes often closed, allowing sound to fill the space between thought and rest. In these moments, the cold of winter was balanced by the warmth of companionship and ritual, by the steady presence of the camp itself. Children played quietly within sight of the fire, their small hands tracing patterns in the snow brought inside, or arranging furs and blankets as props. They learned to move carefully, to respect the cold, to observe the needs of animals and elders. The Khan watched them with a steady gaze, recognizing that even in play, lessons of endurance, attention, and care were being absorbed. These were the seeds of future leaders, warriors, and caretakers of the steppe. During the longest nights, the Khan often remained awake after others had settled. He would sit near the fire, gazing at the snow outside, listening to the wind through the eaves, reflecting upon the day and those to come. His thoughts were slow, deliberate, and not burdened with urgency. He considered the movement of herds, the patterns of weather, the stability of alliances, and the quiet endurance of his people. Even amidst the cold,
there was an understanding of warmth, in fire, in food, in song, in presence. There were occasions when the Khan would venture outdoors at night. Wrapped in furs and guided by attendants, he walked slowly across snow-laden plains, listening to the hush of the world. The stars were bright and innumerable, reflected in ice and snow, mirrored by the frozen rivers. The cold bit at his face, his fingers, his toes, yet it was welcomed as a sign of vitality. The steppe in winter was austere, yet alive, alive in wind, in frost, in the subtle movements of distant animals and shifting snow. Rituals continued in winter, adapted to the cold and darkness. Small fires were set in open spaces, offerings placed upon stones or within the snow, smoke carrying incense and herbs into the night. Shamans moved among the fires, striking their drums, their voices low and resonant. The Khan participated with quiet dignity, acknowledging spirits and ancestors, maintaining continuity of tradition despite the harshness of the season. These acts provided not only spiritual grounding, but also psychological warmth, a recognition that life endured, that the empire's pulse continued, even when the land itself seemed asleep. Meals during festivals in winter were slower and more deliberate. Platters were filled with roasted meat, preserved fruits, and grains that could survive the cold months. Drinks were warmed and spiced, bowls filled to the brim. The Khan accepted each offering with attention, his gestures measured, his presence calm. Warriors, women, and children gathered around fires, sharing warmth, food, and conversation in low tones. The social rhythms of the camp provided continuity, reassurance, and quiet joy. Even in the darkest days, the Khan found moments of humor and lightness. Children would stumble through snow, throwing small clumps at one another, laughter ringing softly.
Warriors recounted old tales, sometimes exaggerating, their voices carrying across the frost. Women arranged small performances, singing quietly or performing dances with furs and blankets as props. These instances, though modest, were treasures against the backdrop of winter's austerity, and the Khan observed with a subtle, approving gaze. Sleep in winter was particularly precious. The Khan would lie among furs, blankets layered to guard against cold, fires banked nearby for warmth. The sounds of the camp were muffled by snow, yet present. The snort of horses, the occasional crack of ice, the distant call of an owl. His body relaxed, his mind slowed, and the cold outside only heightened the comfort within. Sleep came as a gradual, enveloping descent, wrapping him in warmth, the steppe outside a silent white expanse. As the season progressed, the Khan's routine continued with steady rhythm. Mornings were cold and measured, days filled with purposeful activity, evenings devoted to warmth, song, and reflection. The people adapted, their movements thoughtful, their awareness heightened, their unity reinforced. The Khan's presence was constant, yet unobtrusive. His repose mirrored by the camp, his attention balanced by the harshness and beauty of winter. Thus, winter upon the steppe became more than mere survival. It was a period of rest, of reflection, of quiet joy amidst adversity. The Khan and his people found warmth in preparation, in companionship, in ritual, and in the enduring constancy of the land. The empire was alive, even beneath the snow, and the Khan's reign continued, strengthened by the deliberate, measured rhythms of winter life. In the quiet hours, when the camp slept and the wind whispered across white plains, the Khan would lie among furs, listening to the faint murmur of life around him. The cold was kept at bay, the fire steady, the presence of people near. And in that stillness, he rested fully, drawing strength from both the harshness and beauty of the winter steppe, and carrying it forward into the days yet to come. When the weight of battle lifted, and the dust of conquest settled upon foreign soil, the Khan allowed himself a different rhythm. The clash of steel, the thunder of hooves, and the cries of men faded into memory, leaving behind a quiet that seemed both unfamiliar and welcome. After the campaigns, when banners of victory were raised and the conquered lands brought under his command, there came moments of repose, of stillness, within cities and villages that had once resisted, but now lay calm beneath the vastness of his power. The Khan did not move quickly in these times. His steps were measured as he entered the gates of a subdued city, his gaze passing over stone walls, wooden dwellings, temples, and marketplaces. Dust lingered in the air, mingling with the faint smoke of fires and the scent of newly upturned earth. The streets, though marked by conflict, began to fill again with the slow, cautious movements of people, merchants arranging wares, women tending to children, elders watching with wary but steady eyes. The Khan observed with the patience of one accustomed to waiting. He noted the details of each settlement, the color of roofs against the horizon, the texture of walls, the way the sun fell upon stone or clay. He watched the animals tethered in courtyards, the smoke rising from chimneys, the rhythm of hands grinding grain or weaving cloth. These were signs of continuity, of survival, of life that endured even beneath the shadow of conquest. His own dwelling in conquered lands was often a mixture of local design and steppe tradition. In cities, great halls were prepared, their walls adorned with unfamiliar carvings or tapestries, their air scented with incense foreign to the Khan's steppe-born senses. Yet within these halls, he insisted upon the presence of familiar objects, the felt coverings, the wooden chests, the horsehair ropes and saddles that spoke of the open plains. He carried with him the memory of his homeland, embedding it into the spaces he now inhabited, so that even amid foreign stone, he could rest as though beneath the wide sky. Meals reflected the same blending. Local foods were brought forward, rice from irrigated fields, fish from rivers, fruits preserved in honey, and breads baked in ovens. Yet alongside these appeared the meats roasted over open flames, the fermented drinks, and the hearty stews that had long sustained his people. The Khan ate calmly, sampling what was new without haste, acknowledging the labor that produced it, and sharing portions with his attendants and warriors. His manner was unhurried, a steady acceptance of variety, a recognition that conquest extended beyond territory into the fabric of daily life. Evenings in these newly subdued lands carried their own tone. Fires burned within halls or courtyards, casting light on unfamiliar architecture, on pillars and beams shaped by hands not of the steppe. The Khan reclined on furs, his posture one of rest yet also quiet vigilance. Musicians of the conquered people were summoned, their instruments releasing tones unlike those of the horsehead fiddle or drum. The melodies rose in strange patterns, filled with scales and intervals foreign to his ear. Yet he listened attentively, his face still, his mind absorbing the unfamiliar cadences, acknowledging beauty even when distant from his own tradition. Women of conquered lands moved quietly in his presence. Some came willingly, others with hesitation. It all contributed to the atmosphere of subdued continuity. Their garments differed from those of the steppe, silks instead of wool, bright dyes in place of earth tones, jewelry that glittered in firelight. The Khan regarded them with calm detachment, noting the ways their gestures differed, the tilt of a head, the movement of hands in ritual or service, the cadence of speech in languages not his own. He did not hurry these encounters, instead allowing time for observation, for the weaving of new habits into the tapestry of his empire. Warriors, too, found new rhythms in these conquered places. After the strain of battle, they repaired armor, sharpened weapons, and tended to wounds,
But they also explored markets, walked among alleys, and observed customs foreign to their upbringing. Their laughter filled courtyards, subdued yet present, a reminder of resilience. The Khan watched them with measured approval, aware that such adaptation was as essential as martial discipline. In quiet hours, the Khan walked through gardens left intact after conquest. These spaces, designed for contemplation, held pools of still water, rows of trees, and stone pathways softened by moss. The fragrance of flowers, unfamiliar to his senses, drifted upon the air, mingling with the sound of fountains or the rustle of leaves. He moved slowly through these sanctuaries, his eyes tracing each form, his mind attentive to the harmony of arrangement. For a man who had lived much of life upon the shifting steppe, these still cultivated spaces offered a different kind of rest, one born of deliberate design rather than wild expanse. The nights carried their own depth. From palace balconies or city walls, the Khan looked out upon settlements illuminated by torches, their narrow streets glowing faintly against the dark. The air held the mingled scents of firewood, incense, and cooked food, drifting up in waves. Dogs barked faintly in the distance, voices murmured in low tones, and bells of temples rang softly, marking time according to calendars not his own. The Khan listened without judgment, absorbing these sounds as part of the empire he now encompassed. Rest in conquered lands did not mean idleness. It was filled with observation, with subtle integration, with the slow weaving of traditions. The Khan received envoys that came with offerings, their robes heavy with embroidery, their words practiced with care. He accepted their gifts, horses, silks, precious stones, and weapons of fine metal, not with ostentation, but with calm acknowledgement, storing each token as part of the larger whole. His gestures remained deliberate, his speech spare, his authority clear even without excess.
In private, he allowed himself longer periods of repose. Lying upon cushions within halls whose ceilings reached higher than any gur, he felt the weight of stone pressing a different kind of silence upon him. The air within these chambers was cooler, the flicker of torchlight steadier, the echoes of footsteps more distant. Wrapped in furs, he drifted into sleep, the sounds of foreign cities forming a soft backdrop, carts upon cobblestones, distant voices, the rhythm of a land adjusting to new order. At times, he would summon scribes to read or recount the histories of the lands now beneath his banner. Their voices carried tales of dynasties past, of temples razed and destroyed, of rivers redirected and fields cultivated for centuries. The Khan listened in stillness, his expression unreadable, his thoughts absorbing these layers of time. He understood that conquest did not erase the past. It joined it to his own, creating a continuity of memory that stretched beyond his steppe-born vision. Festivals held in his honor blended the old and the new. Local performers danced in intricate patterns, their costumes vivid with color, their movements flowing like water. Musicians played instruments of string and wind, filling courtyards with rising sound. Food and drink flowed in abundance, laughter rising cautiously at first, then more freely as the night progressed. The Khan observed all with a steady gaze, sometimes raising a cup, sometimes nodding in recognition, never hurried, never excessive, always centered within the unfolding scene. Through these days and nights of subdued celebration and careful repose, the Khan allowed his body to recover from battle's demands. Muscles relaxed, wounds healed, breath slowed. Yet his mind remained active, noting each detail, storing each observation, aware that rest was not withdrawal, but preparation. His presence in these conquered lands was not transient, it was the seed of permanence, and his repose within them was a statement of continuity. The conquered cities, though subdued, continued to live. Their markets reopened, their temples sounded with bells and chants, their fields were sown anew. The Khan's presence brought order,
His warriors enforced quiet, but life resumed with a steady pulse. In the midst of this, he rested not as one apart, but as one whose stillness encompassed the rhythm of the entire realm. And so, after conquest, repose became a different kind of victory. It was not loud nor swift, nor marked by banners. It was found in the calm of city courtyards, in the slow meal taken at twilight, in the gaze over rooftops at dawn, in the measured breath of sleep within stone walls. The Khan rested as the empire expanded, his stillness becoming as essential to his reign as the thunder of his campaigns, a reminder that even the greatest storm must be followed by silence, and within that silence, strength endured. When the echoes of battle faded, and the banners of victory had been raised above the plains and the cities, the Khan turned his attention toward his warriors. They had carried him through storms of dust and fire, through rivers crossed with iron and nights lit by flame, and now, in the quiet after conquest, he offered them not only reward, but rest. His men were more than soldiers. They were the breath of his empire, the pulse that kept it alive, and he knew that their strength was preserved not only by discipline, but by repose. The camp after victory was filled with a different kind of sound, no longer the sharp clash of weapons or the heavy thunder of hooves, but the laughter of men unburdened, the soft strumming of instruments, the quiet murmur of stories shared beneath the glow of fire. Horses, unarmored, grazed freely along the edge of rivers and fields. Armor was stacked neatly, weapons laid aside for repair, and men sat upon the earth with cups in their hands, speaking in tones of ease rather than command. The Khan would walk among them slowly. His presence carried weight, but it was not the weight of command in these moments. It was the calm assurance of one who shared in their triumph. He looked upon their faces, weathered by sun and wind, marked with scars, hardened by years of riding and fighting, and he acknowledged each with a nod or a measured glance. These gestures, as simple as they were, carried meaning, for they reminded every man that his effort had been seen, that his labor was not swallowed up by the vastness of the horde. Feasts were prepared with deliberate care. Fires were built large and bright, casting sparks into the evening sky. Whole animals were roasted on spits, their scent drifting across the camp, mingling with the smoke of burning wood. Bowls of fermented drink were passed from hand to hand, their surfaces frothing, their warmth carrying quickly into the blood. Meat was carved and distributed generously, each warrior receiving his share, each attendant, scout, and groom provided for. The Khan himself accepted his portion without excess, eating in slow, steady bites, drinking sparingly, but with presence. Around the fires, songs rose in unison. Warriors sang of battles past, of rivers crossed, of walls broken, of nights endured beneath the cold stars. Their voices, rough and unpolished, carried strength, and in their roughness there was a unity that no single voice could achieve alone. Drums were beaten in steady rhythm, not for war, but for celebration, their deep tones reverberating through the ground, echoing into the night. The Khan listened quietly, his expression calm, his eyes reflecting the flames. There were dances as well. Men moved in circles around the fires, their boots stamping against the earth, their movements heavy and deliberate. Sometimes women joined, their steps lighter, their garments swirling in the light. The dances were not hurried, nor extravagant, but they carried the essence of release, of life lived beyond the burden of campaign. The Khan watched, sometimes with the faintest trace of a smile, recognizing in these movements the soul of his people, unbroken by war, enriched by triumph. After meals and song, warriors shared tales. They spoke of comrades who had fallen, of narrow escapes, of feats accomplished with skill or chance. Each story was met with murmurs, with laughter, with solemn nods, depending on its tone. The Khan often sat in silence, listening. His presence alone gave weight to their words, for they knew their Khan did not forget, and that remembrance was a kind of reward in itself. Gifts were distributed with careful fairness. From the spoils of conquest, gold, silver, silks, and weapons were apportioned. Horses, strong and swift, were given to those whose mounts had fallen. Armor of fine make, captured from foreign lands, was presented to those who had proven themselves in battle. The Khan oversaw this with steady eyes, ensuring that no man felt overlooked, that honor was matched with reward. In this he bound them not only with loyalty, but with gratitude, weaving ties that extended beyond command into trust. The night stretched long, but not idly. Some men played games with dice or bones, their laughter rising into the dark. Others repaired gear, hands busy even in repose. Some leaned back against saddles, gazing at the stars, pointing out constellations that had guided them across endless steppes. The Khan, too, would sometimes look upward, his eyes tracing the same stars, his thoughts quiet, his body at ease in the rhythm of stillness after storm.
He did not separate himself fully from his men in these times. Though his dwelling was larger, adorned with finer furs and guarded by chosen attendants, he often sat upon the same ground, by the same fire, sharing the same drink. His presence was both leader and companion, never diminished, but never aloof. This balance gave comfort, for his men knew that their Khan rested as they did, that his victories were theirs, and that their labor was acknowledged in the quiet rituals of food, fire, and song. In the mornings after such feasts, the camp was slow to rise. The fires had burned low, the embers glowing faintly beneath the ash. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and roasted meat. Warriors stirred beneath their blankets, their movements sluggish, their breath rising in pale clouds. Horses stamped lightly, eager for movement, but the camp remained at peace. The Khan allowed this pause, understanding that rest was as necessary as discipline, that strength was preserved not in unbroken rigor, but in balance. He would sometimes walk through the camp at dawn, when the frost still clung to the ground and silence lingered. He saw his men sleeping, their faces softened, their bodies stretched upon the earth. He felt the depth of their service, the truth of their loyalty, the cost of their endurance. His gaze held neither sentiment nor hardness, but recognition. In these quiet hours the bond between Khan and warrior was strengthened, not by words, but by the simple presence of shared repose. As days passed, the celebrations gave way to quieter rhythms. Men hunted in groups, bringing back game that supplemented the stores of meat. Others tended to horses, combing manes, repairing tack, watching the health of the herds. Some sought out nearby rivers, washing away the dust of travel, immersing themselves in the cool flow. The Khan encouraged these acts, for they renewed the body, cleared the mind, and restored the spirit. At times he gathered his commanders within a circle of firs, where maps were unrolled and plans for future campaigns were discussed. Even in rest, preparation continued. But these councils were not burdensome. They were steady, deliberate, conducted in tones of calm authority. Decisions were made without haste, the weight of empire carried with balance. When the councils ended, commanders returned to the fires, to the songs, to the laughter of their men, carrying both duty and release in equal measure. The Khan himself found rest in simplicity, a bowl of warm broth, a quiet ride beyond the camp, a moment to gaze at the horizon. These were his reprieves. He carried no burden of excess, no indulgence beyond what steadiness required. In his repose there was strength, and his warriors learned from his example that rest was not weakness, but preparation, not surrender, but renewal. Thus, after conquest, the bond between Khan and warrior was renewed in firelight and song, in food and drink, in the silence of shared sleep on the open earth.
It was in these moments, between battles, that the empire was sustained, not by force of arms alone, but by the steady rhythm of lives intertwined, by loyalty that was nourished as much in rest as in war. The steppe winds carried the smoke of their fires across plains and valleys, a signal of life enduring, of strength unbroken, of victory tempered by quietness. And the Khan, resting among his men, knew that in their laughter, in their songs, in their simple repose, lay the true power of his reign. In the stillness that followed battle and conquest, when warriors rested by the fires and the camp returned to quieter rhythms, the Khan sought a different kind of repose. It was found not in the clash of weapons, nor in the weight of counsels, but in the presence of women who brought to his world a gentler balance. They were part of his household, companions and caretakers, reminders of warmth in the midst of harshness. Their presence softened the edge of war, surrounding him with quietness where once there had been only steel and storm. Women came from many places, from the steppes and from the lands newly joined to his empire. Some wore garments woven of wool, plain but warm, colored with earth tones that reflected the horizon of the plains. Others came adorned in silks, in flowing robes embroidered with gold or bright dyes, their hair arranged with care, their hands bearing jewelry of silver and stone. Each carried the marks of her people, the tilt of the eyes, the curve of the brow, the rhythm of speech, and the Khan observed these differences with steady interest. To him they were not only companions, but reflections of the empire's breadth, living symbols of the lands that now lay under his banner. Their presence in his dwelling was marked with gentleness. They moved quietly, arranging furs, setting bowls of warm drink, tending to the fire so its glow would never fade. The scent of their hair oils, of perfumes drawn from flowers or herbs, mingled with the smoke of burning wood, creating an atmosphere distinct from the open campfires of his warriors. Their voices, soft and measured, carried not command but comfort. They spoke little, and when they did, their words blended with the rhythms of rest, soothing rather than demanding. For the Khan, this companionship was not mere indulgence. It was part of the life, as necessary as food, as grounding as fire. After long campaigns, when his body bore the strain of battle and his mind the weight of strategy, the quiet company of women offered release. They brought warmth not from passion alone, but from presence, the touch of a hand, the arrangement of blankets, the sound of gentle song rising in the dim hours of evening. Often he reclined on cushions and furs, while women tended to the space around him. One brushed his hair, long and dark, with deliberate strokes, her movements calm, each pass of the comb carrying away the dust of travel. Another massaged his shoulders and arms, easing the tension from muscles hardened by weeks in the saddle. A third prepared warm broth, scented with herbs, placing the bowl within his reach. These gestures, though simple, restored him, drawing his body and mind into quiet equilibrium. At times, music accompanied these moments. Women from conquered lands brought instruments unfamiliar to the steppe, small harps strung fine threads, flutes carved of reed, drums of lighter pitch than those beaten by warriors. Their melodies rose softly, winding through the air like threads of smoke. The Khan listened with closed eyes, his breathing deep and steady, his mind loosening from the grip of duty. The music was not triumphal. It was gentle, introspective, weaving calm into the air. There was also dances, graceful and deliberate. Women moved in slow patterns, their garments flowing around them, their hands tracing arcs in the firelight. Their steps were measured, not hurried, each turn of the wrist, each sway of the body carrying meaning. The Khan watched with a still gaze, absorbing the rhythm of their movement, not as spectacle, but as an expression of balance and beauty. The dance was part of his rest.
a meditation in motion, anchoring him in the present moment. The nights with women were not only for desire, but for stillness. He lay among them, their warmth surrounding him, the scent of their skin mingling with the furs. The sound of their breathing, steady and calm, formed a rhythm that lulled him into deeper rest. He did not always seek words, nor even touch. Often it was the simple closeness, the presence of life beside him, that gave him ease. In their nearness he felt the continuity of generations, the assurance that life extended beyond war, that softness endured even amidst conquest. Children born of these unions became living symbols of his legacy. Infants were carried within the camp, wrapped in furs, their cries mingling with the sounds of horses and the voices of warriors. The Khan looked upon them with steady eyes, acknowledging in their small forms the extension of his line, the blending of peoples into one. Women cared for them with diligence, feeding them, soothing them, wrapping them against the cold. Their presence filled the camp with a different sound, not the harsh cry of battle, but the fragile wail of new life. In the stillness that followed battle and conquest, when warriors rested by the fires and the camp returned to quieter rhythms, the Khan sought a different kind of repose. It was found not in the clash of weapons, nor in the weight of counsels, but in the presence of women who brought to his world a gentler balance. They were part of his household, companions and caretakers, reminders of warmth in the midst of harshness. Their presence softened the edge of war, surrounding him with quietness where once there had been only steel and storm. Women came from many places, from the steppes and from the lands newly joined to his empire. Some wore garments woven of wool, plain but warm, colored with earth tones that reflected the horizon of the plains. Others came adorned in silks, in flowing robes embroidered with gold or bright dyes, their hair arranged with care,
their hands bearing jewelry of silver and stone. Each carried the marks of her people, the tilt of the eyes, the curve of the brow, the rhythm of speech. And the Khan observed these differences with steady interest. To him, they were not only companions, but reflections of the empire's breadth, living symbols of the lands that now lay under his banner. Their presence in his dwelling was marked by gentleness. They moved quietly, arranging furs, setting bowls of warm drink, tending to the fire so its glow would never fade. The scent of their hair oils, of perfumes drawn from flowers or herbs, mingled with the smoke of burning wood, creating an atmosphere distinct from the open campfires of his warriors. Their voices, soft and measured, carried not command, but comfort. They spoke little, and when they did, their words blended with the rhythms of rest, soothing rather than demanding. For the Khan, this companionship was not mere indulgence, it was part of the balance of life, as necessary as food, as grounding as fire. After long campaigns, when his body bore the strain of battle and his mind the weight of strategy, the quiet company of women offered release. They brought warmth not through passion alone, but through presence, the touch of a hand, the arrangement of blankets, the sound of gentle song rising in the dim hours of evening. Often he reclined upon cushions and furs while women tended to the space around him. One brushed his hair, long and dark with deliberate strokes, her movements calm, each pass of the comb carrying away the dust of travel. Another massaged his shoulders and arms, easing the tension from muscles hardened by weeks in the saddle. A third prepared warm broth, scented with herbs, placing the bowl within his reach. These gestures, though simple, restored him, drawing his body and mind into quiet equilibrium.
At times, music accompanied these moments. Women from conquered lands brought instruments unfamiliar to the steppe. Small harps strung with fine threads, flutes carved of reed, drums of lighter pitch than those beaten by warriors. Their melodies rose softly, winding through the air like threads of smoke. The Khan listened with closed eyes, his breathing deep and steady, his mind loosening from the grip of duty. The music was not triumphal, it was gentle, introspective, weaving calm into the air. There were also dances, graceful and deliberate. Women moved in slow patterns, their garments flowing around them, their hands tracing arcs in the firelight. Their steps were measured, not hurried, each turn of the wrist, each sway of the body carrying meaning. The Khan watched with a still gaze, absorbing the rhythm of their movement, not as spectacle, but as an expression of balance and beauty. The dance was part of his rest, a meditation in motion, anchoring him in the present moment. The nights with women were not only for desire, but for stillness. He lay among them, their warmth surrounding him, the scent of their skin mingling with the furs. The sound of their breathing, steady and calm, formed a rhythm that lulled him into deeper rest. He did not always seek words, nor even touch. Often it was the simple closeness, the presence of life beside him that gave him ease. In their nearness, he felt the continuity of generations, the assurance that life extended beyond war, that softness endured even amidst conquest. Children born of these unions became living symbols of his legacy. Infants were carried within the camp, wrapped in furs, their cries mingling with the sounds of horses and the voices of warriors. The Khan looked upon them with steady eyes, acknowledging in their small forms the extension of his line, the blending of peoples into one. Women cared for them with diligence, feeding them, soothing them, wrapping them against the cold. Their presence filled the camp with a different sound, not the harsh cry of battle, but the fragile wail of new life. In conquered cities, the rhythm of women's companionship took on new forms. Within stone halls, chambers were adorned with tapestries and carpets, with cushions of rich dye, and lamps that cast golden light. Their women moved through these spaces with practiced grace, pouring wine into cups of fine metal, arranging fruit on platters, adjusting veils of silk. Their gestures, though foreign, carried the same essence, the creation of an atmosphere of repose, of calm, and beauty that soothed the weight of empire. The Khan accepted these offerings with the same stillness he carried on the steppe. He did not rush nor demand. He allowed the presence of women to shape the space around him, letting their quiet labors weave a cocoon of rest. His repose was not indulgence, but recognition, that even the greatest warrior required balance, that strength was preserved not only in the clash of arms, but in the soft touch of gentleness. The songs of women lingered long after they ceased. Their voices, high and clear, wove tales of their homelands, of rivers that shone beneath the moon, of mountains veiled in mist, of gardens where flowers bloomed each spring. The Khan did not understand every word, but the tone carried meaning enough. He listened in silence, allowing their melodies to wash over him, reminding him that the world was vast and that beauty survived even amidst conquest. When the night deepened and the fires burned low, the Khan lay among them, surrounded by warmth, by breath, by stillness. The empire stretched far beyond those walls, far beyond those tents, yet in that moment it was condensed into the nearness of women, into the quiet rhythm of shared repose. The weight of campaigns, of maps and councils, of victories and losses, receded into the background, leaving only the immediacy of life's gentleness. Thus, in the presence of women, the Khan found rest not only for his body, but for his spirit. They were the balance to his storms, the still water to his thunder, the grounding presence that reminded him of continuity. Conquest brought expansion, but companionship brought endurance. And in their quiet, steady presence, he drew strength for the days yet to come.
The empire stretched vast across mountains, rivers, and endless plains. Yet even the greatest of rulers sought stillness in the land itself. For the Khan, rest was not found only within walls or among companions, but also in the wide embrace of nature. The earth of the steppe, the flow of rivers, the shifting light upon mountains, all these carried a quiet strength that restored him after the weight of command. When the camp grew still and councils dispersed, he sometimes left the hearths and voices behind, stepping into the immensity of the land. He mounted his horse without procession, with only a handful of trusted guards at a distance, and rode into the open fields where wind brushed through grasses and the sky stretched unbroken to every horizon. The steppe offered a silence deeper than stone halls, and within that silence he found his thoughts softening, his breath falling into rhythm with the pace of the horse. The grasses swayed in waves, rising and falling like a sea beneath the wind. Their whispering sound accompanied his journey, a constant murmur that neither pressed nor intruded, but wrapped him in calm. The scent of earth, of soil warmed by the sun, rose beneath each hoofbeat. Overhead, clouds drifted slowly, shifting shapes across the expanse of blue. Each detail was simple, yet in its simplicity lay release, a reminder that the world endured with or without conquest. Rivers drew him often, their steady flow carrying with it a sense of timelessness. He would dismount upon their banks, watching the water move over stone and silt, sparkling where light caught its surface. The sound of running water was a voice without words, a song that soothed without demanding. He would sit upon the ground, knees drawn close, hands resting upon the earth, and watch the current slip past, carrying leaves, twigs, and the reflection of the sky. In those moments, the burdens of rule seemed lighter, carried downstream with the endless flow. Forests, too, offered their quiet. Within the shade of trees, he breathed the coolness of leaves, the sharp scent of pine, or the sweetness of birch. Birds shifted in branches above, their wings stirring the air with sudden flutter, their calls echoing softly through the trunks. He walked slowly upon paths of earth and fallen needles, the ground softened by years of growth and decay. Each step carried him deeper into the hush, where only natural rhythms prevailed. The weight of empire seemed far away, replaced by the immediacy of root and branch, of bird call and breeze. At times he sought mountains. Their slopes rose dark and steady, their peaks veiled in mist or snow, their silence vast. The climb was not hurried, nor for conquest. It was a deliberate ascent, each step measured, each breath filled with thin, sharp air. Upon reaching high ridges, he would stand and gaze outward, the land unfolding below in endless folds of hill and valley, plain and river. From such heights, the scale of the empire was visible, yet so too was its fragility. In the face of stone that had stood for ages, his victories and struggles seemed fleeting, like shadows passing across the earth. Hunting formed part of his communion with nature.
It was not mere sport, but a ritual that tied him to the cycles of life. Riding through grasslands with bow in hand, he followed the movements of deer or gazelle, watching their sleek forms dart through the steppe. The chase was swift yet balanced, a rhythm between hunter and hunted. When an animal was taken, it was treated with solemn respect, its body shared among companions, its hide prepared for use. In this, the Khan reaffirmed the bond between man and land, between hunger and provision, between strength and humility. Even in moments of stillness, he studied the animals of the plains. Horses grazing in herds, their manes lifted by the wind. Eagles circling high, their wings spread in effortless flight. Wolves moving with stealth through the grass, their eyes bright with alertness. Each creature embodied a way of survival, a lesson in endurance. The Khan watched them not only as a ruler, but as a student, absorbing the patterns of life that had shaped the steppe long before his rise. Night in the wilderness brought its own peace. Beneath the canopy of stars, the Khan lay upon furs spread upon the ground, the fire burning low at his side. The sky stretched infinite, filled with constellations that warriors had named and shepherds had followed for generations. The cold air sharpened his senses, yet the vastness overhead softened his spirit. The crackle of the fire, the scent of smoke, the distant cry of an owl, all formed a part of a rhythm older than empire. Wrapped in this immensity, he drifted into rest, his dreams carried by the same winds that swept the plains. Seasons altered the face of the land, each offering its own form of repose. In spring, rivers swelled with melting snow, and grasses grew thick and green, dotted with flowers of yellow and white. The Khan walked among these fields, the scent of new growth filling the air, his boots damp with dew. In summer, the plains shimmered beneath the sun, the heat rising in waves, the air filled with the hum of insects. He rested in the shade of tents, watching the horizon blur in golden haze. In autumn, leaves turned to red and amber, drifting slowly to the ground, while the wind carried the crispness of coming frost. In winter, the land lay silent beneath snow, its surface smooth and unbroken, its stillness profound. The Khan embraced each season, finding in their changes a reminder of continuity, of cycles beyond the grasp of men. He often rode alone across the horizon at dawn, when the first light touched the grass with silver. The camp remained behind him, still wrapped in sleep, while he moved forward into the awakening land. The air was sharp, the earth cool beneath his horse's hooves, and the world stretched quiet, as though holding its breath. In those hours, he felt closest to the essence of the steppe, vast, enduring, eternal. The ride itself was not toward conquest or destination, but toward presence, toward a state of being where nothing more was required than the rhythm of breath, the beat of hooves, the unfolding of light. Water, fire, wind, and stone, these were the elements that steadied him. He sat by rivers to feel the flow of water, by fires to feel warmth, in winds to feel movement, among stones to feel endurance. Each element spoke without words, offering lessons older than any empire. He received them with quiet acceptance, letting their balance seep into his own spirit. Thus, in nature, the Khan found a rest that no chamber, no council, no festival could provide. It was not the rest of forgetting, but of remembering that man was part of the land, that conquest was only one moment within its vast story, that even the greatest of rulers remained bound to the cycles of earth and sky. In that remembrance he drew strength, not for war alone, but for life itself.
In the final years, when conquest had slowed and the empire stretched vast and secure, the Khan's moments of rest turned ever more toward his family and the circle of his closest kin. The weight of campaigns had eased. Though councils and decisions still demanded his presence, there were long days when he remained among the people who were dearest to him. These hours did not carry the noise of battle nor the demands of rule, but the gentle rhythms of hearth, laughter, and remembrance. Within the wide tent, the hearth fire burned with steady glow. Around it sat his wives, his children, and the children of his children. Their garments were warm and plain, adorned not for ceremony but for comfort. The voices of women moved softly through the air as they prepared food, shaping dough, stirring broths, tending to the needs of the young. The scent of boiling meat and fresh bread mingled with the smoke of the fire, filling the space with homely warmth. Children's laughter rose often, bright and unrestrained. They played with carved figures of wood, with balls stitched of hide, with scraps of cloth fashioned into dolls. Their games echoed through the tent, filling corners with life. The Khan watched them with stillness, his face unreadable yet softened. The sound of their joy was unlike the cries of victory. It was lighter, freer, a reminder of continuance. In their small hands and quick movements, he saw not only bloodlines, but the unfolding of the future, lives that would stretch beyond his own. His sons came often, sitting near him in calm silence. They were men already, their shoulders broad, their voices deepened, their presence steady. They spoke of governance, of lands beyond the horizon, of men and tribes who sought counsel. Yet in these gatherings, the tone was different than in council tents. Here the words carried less urgency, more patience, as though the vast empire could wait while father and sons shared food and thoughts. The Khan listened more than he spoke, his gaze steady, his nods measured. His legacy lay before him, not only in land, but in these faces, in these lives shaped by his own. In the evenings, when the fire burned low and the younger children drowsed against cushions, the Khan sometimes told stories of the old days. His voice was low, unhurried, carrying not the authority of command, but the tone of memory. He spoke of hunts across the plain, of winters endured, of the harsh days when survival had been uncertain. He did not boast nor seek to magnify. He told them as one recounts the natural course of life. The children listened with wide eyes, the women with quiet attention. In these stories lay not only the shape of the past, but the rhythm of endurance, the sense that all struggles led to moments such as these. Beyond the tent, the camp followed its own steady beat. Fires glowed in many places, smoke curling into the dark. Voices of warriors, of herders, of servants mingled in the night air. Horses stamped upon the earth, their harnesses plinking softly. The empire lived in these countless sounds, yet within the Khan's dwelling there was a separate peace, a pocket of stillness that belonged not to empire but to family. As years moved, his steps grew slower, his rest longer. Yet he remained steady, his presence like the mountains upon the horizon, unchanging in their silence, vast in their endurance. He spent more hours watching than speaking, his eyes following the play of children, the movement of women's hands, the flicker of firelight across the walls of the tent. In watching, he seemed to draw strength, as though seeing life continue was itself a form of repose. Sometimes he stepped outside into the night, alone, wrapped in heavy furs. The steppes stretched endless, the stars burning bright above. He stood long in the silence, breathing the cold air, feeling the earth firm beneath his feet. The winds carried with them the scent of grass, of smoke, of snow. In that vastness he felt the truth that had guided his life, that man and earth were bound together, and that even the greatest of rulers was but a part of the eternal plane. In his final seasons, he did not seek glory or spectacle. His rest came from nearness, of fire, of kin, of land. Conquests lay behind him. Before him stretched the unbroken continuity of life. He had gathered lands, built bonds, left behind children who would carry forward the name and the work. Now his gaze turned not toward expansion, but toward the rhythm of days, the quiet pulse of existence. When his time neared its close, the camp did not fall into alarm. Life continued as it always had. Fires were lit, horses tended, children played, women sang. The Khan lay within his dwelling, surrounded with warmth, his family near. The sounds of life rose around him, steady and familiar. He breathed them in, as though they were the truest treasure of all, more enduring than conquest, more comforting than wealth. And so the story found its rest. The vast empire remained, the steppes stretched unbroken, the rivers flowed, the mountains stood. His name would endure in chronicles and memory, but his final peace was simple: the nearness of family, the stillness of earth, the quiet of stars. The tale closed not with thunder, but with silence, an ending as calm as sleep itself.